Hi, everyone. This is Marilyn Bradford, and I would like to welcome you to my Left Turn podcast. What is your left turn? Writing a blog, parenting in a different way, letting go of the old because you are aware of something greater. Left turns are choices we can all make. It's about a willingness to step into the unknown in any area of your life, to trust yourself, to risk creating or trying something new. It's about letting your true uniqueness shine. The greatest people who have lived, artists, statesmen, writers, explorers, musicians, have all been people willing to turn left. What capacities do you have that you have not acknowledged? What would your life and the world be like if you were willing to turn left? Hello, I'm Marilyn Bradford, and welcome to another edition of the Left Turn podcast. Today, I have an incredible man who's made a journey over 13 years, for decades, to be more, create more, generate more, and really empower people to change. Currently, besides being an access consciousness facilitator, he facilitates the opening of the symphony and oversees the SOP classes with Dr. Dane here. He's a chiropractor. He's a single dad and has done amazing things with his kids. He just never stops creating and never stops being the greatest that he can be. So I would like to welcome Dr. Anthony Mattis.
Thank you. Thanks, Marilyn. Thanks for having me. And just to update the bio, I am now a married dad.
Oh, right.
Don't forget about the Julia.
How could I forget that? Yeah. He is married to a wonderful woman. I was going back to when I met him 13 years ago, going forward.
Just want to clarify, just in case her mom was watching.
Okay. Yes, I think that's good. My bad. You're good. Okay. So, Anthony, what are some of the most important left turns that you made in your life and are still making?
Yeah, that's right. Right. So, oh man, well, I would have to first say, all those left turns that showed up weren't because I decided to turn left. It was almost like at the time it felt like life was forcing me to turn left. Like I didn't have a choice, right? That's kind of how I looked at it at the time. It just wasn't until later on when I had to sort of acknowledge my life changing and shifting, sometimes as a result of other people's choices. And I had to really, really be in the question about like, what's right about all of this I'm not getting, and how does it get any better than this? Because it wasn't what I had decided was going to be my life.
Right.
Or, it's like you have dreams, you have aspirations, and you see yourself like kind of going on this linear journey of ups and downs, but when you say left turn, it's like right. And it's like, whoa, and in those moments, it's like it almost feels as if in your universe time stops. Right? And in that moment, when it feels like time stops in your world, you're perceiving everything still moving. And I remember saying to myself, oh my God, there's no, what's the word? Look, things move always with or without you. And I realized in those moments, I needed to make a choice to keep going or to give up and quit. And those are difficult. Those are difficult times. Those are difficult moments. And so, in particular, the one that jumps out, I've had many left turns, but the one that jumps out at me the most was, my wife of 10 years, we had 3 children together. And, her and we sort of kind of both together led this life, the life of Pi. I don't know if you ever saw that movie where this individual, like, sort of like experienced all these different things, philosophies and religions and journeys and all that kind of stuff. And that was like my life, being a chiropractor and kind of even like the out of the box chiropractor. I was always into sort of even the alternative of the alternatives.
Right.
And so, when I met her, she was very interested in the whole universe that I was exploring, and it was something that was always um, part of her being as well. And she's like, I'm very interested in this path that you're on. And I'm like, well, come join me, because I also suffered from the savior mentality. And it's interesting, the first like 15 minutes of me meeting her, she's like, I have bipolar disorder, and I know there's a way to
Wow.
overcome it. And I'm like, oh my God, you're so beautiful and smart and intelligent, and why don't you come to my metaphysical book club meeting, and we talk about the laws of the mind, body, and soul. So both her and I, we did that. We fell in love. And at the time, our first child, he was 8 months old. So she already had a baby, 8 months old. And I knew the day that I had held him in my arms at one of these metaphysical book club meetings that I was going to be his father. Like I knew. And
Yeah.
he was sort of the glue that, this is Elijah, he was the glue that really like made it okay to pursue this relationship, and I was trying to figure out how to get away from where I was currently practicing as a chiropractor. So fast forward, we become these metaphysical practitioners, and then we had a guru from India. I experienced one of her bipolar episodes, which was not fun. I mean, talking about, that was like where like, oof, I had front row seats to watching someone go from sane to insane.
Wow.
And at that particular, talk about left turn, at that particular time, her mom had committed suicide.
Wow.
And because she had struggled with chronic depression for years and years and years, and she had received electric convulsion therapy. She had been on 5 or 6 different medications, mood stabilizers, antidepressants, anti-anxieties. And I'll never forget that day when the mother said to me, how's Jessica doing? That was my wife's name, because she had already had a major bipolar episode when she was 17 before I met her. And I said, she's doing great. And she was. She was sane,
Yeah.
stable for 3.5 years. Her mom decides to commit suicide like 2 or 3 days after.
Wow.
And then I was like, oh my God. So in that moment, I saw my wife's universe start of like, she was holding on
Hmm.
and not go into some like episode, and we were struggling financially and blah blah blah. About a year later, she goes into a full-blown hypomanic episode or bipolar episode, and that was like, talk about left turns. I'm like, where's my wife? Where's the sweet, docile, like kind, like she just poof. And so between that and us struggling financially and me being a controlling husband, and she also suffered from alcoholism at the time. All of that was just a perfect storm. And then I would say that was major left turn number one. And I had to really decide if, once the episode sort of settled down,
Yeah.
if I was going to take her back. Because I'm like, is this going to be my life? Is this going to be my future? Always having to be on alert for when this episode comes back, right? And so, make a really long story short, she actually went through the 12 steps at the time, and then she decided to become a Christian. So we decided to do that after the guru phase and after the metaphysical phase, and then I decided to become a Christian too. So we became these sort of like non-denominational evangelical Christians, speaking in tongues, praying for miracles. And and then she did AA, which would, the 12 steps, which I found to be such a fantastic, cathartic uh, exercise, if you will, and process. And it was really cool. And I watched her change over the course of 12 months working these steps. And so I decided to take her back. And then we made one more baby. We had my son, and then we made another baby, my daughter Aria. And there was the three of us. And she was sane, stable, and sober. Life was better than it had ever been. Um, it was like our marriage was restored. And then about 5.5 years later, out of the blue,
Uh-huh.
no triggers other than awareness, but no triggers in terms of like everyday stressful life stuff. Like
Right.
we were walking in the park with the kids, and she literally goes, and she like grabs her like heart. I'm like, what's wrong? She's like, and I'm like, let me take your pulse, right? Because I know how to do that.
Yeah.
Her heart rate was like 120 beats a minute. I'm like, what's going on? She goes, I don't know. I feel like I'm gonna have a heart attack. And I'm like, well, what triggered it? And she goes, I don't know. She goes, I just looked over there at this beautiful couple. She was like, it was like something jumped off of them onto me. And at the time, so I'm like, your heart rate's 120 beats a minute. Do you want me to take you to the emergency room? Because we call that tachycardia.
Yeah.
If I had a patient come in as a chiropractor having that, I would have to send him to the ER. Anyway, she's like, no, they'll just put me on, mood stabilizers and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, babe, like, this is
Yeah.
not a good thing, And so, anyway, and at the time, I'm like, nothing could have jumped off of them onto you because we're now Christians and we have the blood of Christ and we're supposed to be protected from these sorts of things like demon attacks and all that. And so I was angry, not at her. I was angry, sort of just at life in that moment. And she was really resisting receiving help, right? I was just trying to get her at the time on like natural supplements and things like that to like maybe bring her neurotransmitters down to a common level. She didn't even want to take those. And
Wow.
so that snowballed over 7 months to the point where she decided the day before she took her own life, she's like, look, I don't want you and the kids to have to go through this. And her point of view, because I found like notes later, her point of view was that she had felt that this was God's plan for her.
Mm.
And that she's like, I don't want you and the kids to have to go through this like I had to go through this with my mother. And I literally said to her, look, I will deal with one bad year because it would take her about a year to recover. For 5.5 good years, she was sane, stable, sober, no medications, by the way. And then all of a sudden, this thing comes out of nowhere. So she died. She took her life 2 days later, and I literally talked. That was the next big major left turn. I was like,
Yeah.
what the fuck? Like
Yeah.
seriously, like, okay, God, what the fuck? Like, right? Like we have done everything, all different types of things. Even the Christian thing, right? Which according to Christians is the most right thing to do, to be in favor with God and all that. And I was angry, so angry. And I remember the church would come to me and they're like, well, you opened up the door to the devil with all this alternative chiropractic stuff you do.
Oh,
I was like,
wow.
fuck you. I was like, fuck you. Are you kidding me? She started getting sick before I even started exploring the alternative stuff. Right? Or sick as we would say
Yeah.
it in this reality. And I'll never forget the day she died. They actually asked me to forgive them for they literally, I'm trying to get her on natural supplements. She refused. We had this big prayer circle with all the elders in the church and the pastor. And they're like, will you give Dr. Jesus a little while longer? And I'm like, I don't think I need to ask Jesus if the law of gravity is in place if I was to jump off of that stage right there. I'm trying to get her on vitamins, not mood stabilizers and antipsychotics, okay? And they're like, well, this isn't the same thing as what it was 5.5 years ago because you all didn't have Jesus. So talk about feeling wrong. Here I am, 12 of them are challenging my awareness. If there's
Right.
anybody that knows my wife at the time was me, her father, and her sister, because they've seen this before. And I'm trying to nip it in the butt with natural stuff. And so anyway, she dies. They apologize for being wrong. And then as a Christian, you're supposed to forgive. And I'll never forget, I said this, like, you know what? I know I'm supposed to forgive you, and maybe I could forgive you here. And, I was all dramatic about it, but I'm like, I'll never forgive you from my heart because you guys are fucking superior assholes.
Yeah.
So anyway, fast forward.
That was a left turn.
That's a left turn, and I'm like, what the hell? And the kids at the time were 10, 8, and 2.5. And if there are Christians out there, look, I love Jesus. I'm not saying anything bad about religion and all that stuff, but it does have its limitations when it's a shoulda, okay, or
Yeah.
when it's in a box, okay. That's all I got to say about that. Um, and so then fast forward, I remember just sitting around. I was reading stuff. I'm like, man, and I'm actually praying. I'm talking to God. I said, hey, God, for someone who's done a lot of therapy, for someone who I also worked the 12 steps because I was like a classic codependent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've done all this metaphysical stuff. I did I did all this praying in tongues to God and Jesus. I did the guru stuff, the meditations, the yoga, the chants. I did all of that stuff. I did rebirthing. I did all that stuff. And I'm like, I have nothing to show for it. I'm a widower. As far as financial wise, I knew I was a great healer. I said, but I got nothing to show for that either because it's like I'm just making a mediocre living. I'm not thriving. I was like a
Mhm.
starving artist, but I was a starving healer kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, if that tragedy did not happen, am I satisfied with, let's just forget about the tragedy for 1 second. Am I actually satisfied with what I've created so far? And the answer was no. I'm like, God, for someone who's worked his ass off, this is like mediocre life
Mhm.
and living. And now I'm a widower. So at that point, I'm thinking maybe I'm a lost cause. I made it my mission to make sure that my kids were going to be okay,
Mhm.
right? So I became like helicopter dad, but not like, for them to be like the greatest athlete or the greatest, musician or whatever. Just like helicopter in terms of like, don't make this choice because you may end up like your mom. Don't make this choice because you may be stupid like me. Don't make this choice. You know what I mean? I was just very annoying. And then I'm like, but in order for me to change wherever it is that I'm locked up,
Mhm.
it's way beyond the unconscious mind. So I literally
Mhm.
was like, hey, God, I'm going to go outside the box if I have to. And I don't care if I go to hell for it. But you need to find me something that can get to wherever it is that I'm messed up that's beyond cognitive,
Mhm.
conscious mind and unconscious mind and psychotherapy. And then all of a sudden, like 9 months later, I hear about this thing called Access Consciousness Bars. And it was like a free little telecall thing. And it actually said almost those exact words. Like this particular tool method gets to those places energetically that's way beyond like the unconscious and conscious mind. And I
Mhm.
was like, ooh. And then I learned about the co-creator of Access Consciousness, Dr. Dane here, who was also suicidal 20, 30, 25 years ago. And he had his bars run. And after the first time, he said he woke up the next day and he's like, the idea, he had planned his suicide. The idea of taking his own life wasn't in his universe anymore. And then, fast forward now, he joined Gary Douglas, the founder of Access Consciousness, who had been doing Access for about, I guess, 10 years or so when him and Dane got together. And now, it's in 170 something different countries all over the world. And, I'll never forget the time that you and I met at the first foundation class. You were the facilitator of foundation. And I still had a lot of the points of view of the church in my head.
Right.
So I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to hell. This is probably by far the weirdest, wildest, wackiest set of tools compared to rebirthing, compared to the guru, even compared to praying in tongues in church. And in throughout those journeys, I did have a lot of wonderful supernatural experiences, Marilyn, but it's like it never transitioned into my everyday life.
Right.
And I remember I was kind of grilling you in that class, being like, what about this? What about that? And what was really beautiful about it was you never gave me any answers. You only asked me questions. And by the end of the class, I was basically drooling on myself. I'm like, I don't know if I even learned anything, but all I know is something is profoundly shifting in my universe energetically. So I was like, there's something to this work. And to rewind, after my third bars class, this is before I met you. This was 11 months after she had passed away.
Uh-huh.
And oh, let's rewind again. I actually sent Dane an email, right? I didn't realize how big Access was at the time. So I'm sending him an email, Dr. Dane here, of my whole story, crying, like, you're a chiropractor, like, I'm a chiropractor. And you were suicidal, and my wife took her life. And then I get this auto reply. I'm like, shucks, I'm never going to have this like intimate relationship with him. 1 week later, I get a phone call from Dr. Dane here in my chiropractic office.
Wow.
And he's like, I'm like, Dane? He's like, yeah. I'm like, dude, thanks for calling me. And the first thing he said to me, and I do a monthly call series called this because of this reason. He goes, I just want you to know the universe has your back.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh man, I'm like, what do I, and I hadn't even taken a bars class yet. I'm like, what do I do? He's like, go to a bars class. I'm like, okay, fine. And I'm like, even, and I remember being like, I don't know, this stuff is kind of weird. And I even had people, when I started asking people about access consciousness, like, don't do it, it's a cult. There's a lot of bad things about it, da da da. So even though I had like, my mind was like, something kept going like this. And it wasn't evil, it wasn't demonic, it was awareness and curiosity.
Cool.
And no matter how many people kept saying, no, no, this, that, blah, 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 I was like, I'm just gonna go check it out. And all I can say is it delivered and has been delivering
Yeah.
what they said it would, which is these tools get to those places that are beyond the conscious and unconscious mind.
Yes.
It unlocks things out here, and it may not make any sense whatsoever. It unlocks things out here that finally changes things here. How does it do it? I still have no idea. I just know that it does it.
Yes.
And so here we've got to explore and play. And that's what happened in the foundation class with you. I was literally drooling on myself, being like, I don't know what I learned, but all I know is I need to keep going
Yeah.
because I was fried and I could perceive like the old neural pathways collapsing and like new ones forming, if you want to be scientific about it. Right. And so I'm like, wow, I've never experienced anything like this before. So I kept going and I kept going and I kept showing up and I kept receiving, and things would change. Things would change enough for me to want to go back to the next class. And most importantly, as a father at the time, I watched what the access consciousness bars did to my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to use one word: ease.
Mm-hmm.
Ease. Now they're 24, 22, and 16. And they've gone through their phases of having to find their own reality. I was very sort of, I did a lot of parenting from PTSD, right? Fear that they'll end up like their mom, fear that genetic predisposition may reveal itself. So I did everything in my power to make sure that epigenetics was not a factor, like the things that they chose. I tried to control their choices.
Mm-hmm.
Nowhere in Access, by the way, says to do that.
Right.
That was just me being controlling Italian father, and so I think because of that, they needed to separate from
Mm.
the tools that they learned, unfortunately. And so I had to sit here and watch them sort of kind of destroy different parts and pieces of their lives. And that's been really difficult for me. But, we learn in Access to be an allowance of people's choices and
Yes.
interesting point of
Yes.
view. And I've personally found that to be the most difficult when it comes to my family,
Of
not my
course.
clients, but my family. So, and
Of
I've been
course.
working on that. So,
Yeah.
I haven't arrived. It's consciousness is an ongoing journey. And something always comes along and bitch slaps you and doesn't creates that other left turn and make you really recognize where you are on this journey.
Yes.
So that's it in a nutshell.
That was amazing, Anthony. And I just have this sense, it almost brings me to tears of how much that story is going to help other people.
I hope so. I
I
hope so,
mean,
because these tools are so powerful.
yes,
And I know there's a lot of stuff out there in the public side that gives Access a bad rap, but they're really just a set of pragmatic tools that are
yes,
really powerful and potent that can change anything in your life that's not working for you.
yes, absolutely. And you doing so much now with the SOP and opening of the symphony and energetic work. And I've been in your classes. It's powerful stuff. And this is very powerful too.
Yeah, thank you. Well, you had a lot to do with that. It's like you were part of paving the way for me.
Well, I'm glad I could.
Seriously, I mean, if it wasn't for that class, I wouldn't have gone to the next one. But you did your thing. You did your thing. You facilitated consciousness in my world by dropping universe, by not being the guru, but by being a catalyst to open up my universe to something greater.
Well, I'm so glad, and thank you, and you're welcome. As Dane always says, thank you and you're welcome.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I want to really thank you for coming on today and for sharing that. It was so clear. So, this is not very accessy, but heartfelt, so aware, so honest.
Yeah.
And I'm thrilled that we're going to be able to put this out there for the world. So thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Meryl. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining this episode of Left Turn. I wonder what embracing left turns could create in your life. What magical possibilities might show up. Remember, when you choose left turns, you are joining a group of the most creative and brilliant people the world has ever known.